No problem. Yeah. And so just wanted to let you know the
Yeah.
way we here is if you have any questions, you can post on chat, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll unmute people if they want to, actually ask a question. And we work through interactivity as a one-on-one, two-on-one presentation. If you don't know anything, Howard would,
Maybe
obviously
I know it.
knows
uh,
know it. Howard, just one question. When you were
yeah.
talking about Caesar and Pompey, the was how much of the effect was on Caesar the fact that his daughter was married to Pompey and then she subsequently passed away? Was that why they kind of fell apart?
How this work? You notice that any woman, any female associated with Julius Caesar's name Julia. Romans almost didn't have. I think there was a comment in here that when she apparently women very important in Egypt, they had a lot of status. When Cleopatra arrived in Rome, it was commented she had no more status than chickens and infants. Caesar married his daughter to Pompey. That sort of gave them an ally. It's kind of cemented their alliance together and created their so-called triumvirate. I believe she died in childbirth, and the baby didn't survive, which obviously broke that bond. At this point, I don't know how well the two men got along. They were mind-bogglingly ambitious. This is the comment that's made about Caesar over and over again. The guy, I didn't mention this one, but I forgot to mention this one, is at some point he's reading up on Alexander the Great and he broke down crying, saying, my God, Alexander the Great conquered half the world when he was by the time he was my age. What have I done? And you can even see this in the 20th century with guys like Mussolini in Italy. Where you see this in the 19th century, Napoleon, and with Mussolini in Italy, as a great man, your job is to go out and conquer stuff, and who cares about the havoc you cause?
Howard, we have a comment here that I can't read the words put up on the screen. They're too small and too light.
Okay, sorry. If I can zoom in, I don't know. Can I zoom in on this?
Can you increase the screen somehow? Zoom out?
Let's see what I can do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm just looking for a Zoom thing. Oh, that didn't work.
For some reason, it's only selecting a presentation.
Yeah.
It feels like it doesn't give a full screen. It's
Yeah,
almost
let
like
me just go in there and look at that. Can I enlarge that font a bit? My note. Caesar and Ptolemy, there it is. I'm going that table. I can probably see if I can enlarge the font in that table there. Table, that's table font. Somehow I shrunk that font down a bit. Let's see how I did it.
I think okay, just let it go, and then maybe
okay.
Read some of the stuff as well.
I'm gonna go through. Well, I'm not reading it directly. It's sort of the whole thing. How did I do that? Classic content table. Back to here. Let's go. Edit. Sorry. Yeah. I'm having trouble enlarging that. I'll go through. Let me through it. Let me go through. Let me go through this. Okay. Macedonian. If you read up on ancient Macedonia and the various kingdoms that appeared, an awful lot of women. There were an awful lot of women running around with the name of Cleopatra. Even in Egypt, Cleopatra was Cleopatra the VII. So there were 6 predecessors and a successor. The name means glory of her fatherland. The Ptolemies were Macedonian. When Alexander the Great died, his generals fought over his empire and split everything up in what they call the Wars of the Diadochi, or Diadochi. General Ptolemy wound up with Egypt. He ruled as pharaoh. He started construction of the Library of Alexandria, which would make Alexandria a center of learning in the ancient world. Ptolemy had all sorts of mistresses and wives, but the important ones were Eurydice, the daughter of Antipater, king of Macedonia, and later Berenice, a cousin of Eurydice. Berenice is another very popular name with the Macedonians. Ptolemy willed his kingdom to his youngest son by Berenice, Ptolemy II. Ptolemy II executed a couple of his brothers. The various Macedonian kingdoms were absolutely horrible when it came to family relationships, as we're going to see. Where am I here? He married Arsinoe, yet another daughter of Lysimachus, king of Thrace, Asia Minor, and Macedon. She was later chased off and married. Ptolemy II married his sister, Arsinoe II. This sort of thing was shocking to the ancient Greeks, but the Egyptian pharaohs routinely did this sort of were incestuous. They routinely married. They routinely married brothers and sisters. Ptolemy II has the nickname, or what do you call it, epithet, Philadelphoi, and that means sibling lover. Arsinoe II formally adopted Arsinoe for his children, and she didn't have any of her own. The Ptolemies solely adopted Egyptian religion and culture. Ptolemy II's eldest son, Ptolemy III, inherited the title of pharaoh. He married Berenice II. She was queen of Cyrenaica, which is North Africa, just west of Egypt, and she was the half cousin of Ptolemy. Ptolemy III was succeeded by his eldest son, Ptolemy IV, who would have been around 20. His courts, I believe they usually claim that the first three Ptolemies were effective rulers, and things kind of went downhill after that. His court officials organized a purge of his family, killing his uncle, his younger brother, and possibly his mother, Berenice II. He married his older sister, Arsinoe III. The next pharaoh was their 5-year-old son, Ptolemy V. There was a series of incompetent regents. Neighboring rulers attacked and seized territory. And there was the Fifth Syrian War. There was a revolt in Upper Egypt led by Horwenefer and Ankwenefer. When he came of age, Ptolemy V made peace with the Seleucid kings, with the Seleucid king, and married his daughter Cleopatra I. The Romans were helping him in this war, and they were thoroughly disgusted. Ptolemy V reconquered Upper Egypt. He died. He may have been poisoned by courtiers who feared a renewed war of the Seleucids. Ptolemy V, the sixth, took the throne at the age of 6. Egypt was ruled by Cleopatra I, who I guess is his mother, and by regents. The Seleucids resumed the Syrian wars and defeated the Egyptians very badly. Ptolemy VI married his sister Cleopatra II, and he fought for power with his brother Ptolemy VIII. The Ptolemy VII is mysterious. Nobody seems to know anything about him. I do have a thing there on him, but he's mysterious. They don't know when he ruled. Where am I here? Ptolemy VI defeated the Seleucids, but he was mortally wounded. Ptolemy VIII took over, married his sister Cleopatra II. He married Cleopatra III, who was a daughter, I guess a niece, so he's a daughter of Ptolemy VI and Cleopatra II. So he's a niece and stepdaughter. When Ptolemy VIII died, Cleopatra III ruled with her sons Ptolemy IX and Ptolemy X. Cleopatra III kicked Ptolemy IX from the kingdom, but he seized Cyprus. Cyprus is a critical bit of territory. It's just north of Egypt and allowed you to control the Eastern Mediterranean. He invaded Judea. He was unable to take Egypt back. Ptolemy X murdered his mom, Cleopatra III, and married his niece. This is Ptolemy IX's daughter, Berenice III, and they co-ruled until the Egyptians kicked them out and brought back Ptolemy IX. Ptolemy IX promoted his daughter back to co-ruler, and then he died. Berenice III summoned her half-brother and stepson, Ptolemy XI, home from Rome. The Romans were getting heavily involved out here, and the Romans were sort of working with the Ptolemies. They didn't like them very much, but Egypt was fabulously well. We're going to go over the wealth of Egypt. Suda was hoping to set him up as a client king. Where are we here? Ptolemy III. What? Hang on. That's a mistake. What have I done there? Oh, well, Ptolemy married Berenice III, and he murdered her almost immediately. I guess she was popular. The Egyptian mobs the Egyptians were enraged, and a mob lynched him. The next pharaoh was Ptolemy the 12th. They think he was illegitimate. He was an illegitimate son of Ptolemy the 9th. He married Cleopatra the 5th, who was probably a sister or cousin. They had a daughter, Berenice the 4th. Ptolemy the 12th had more kids. They're not sure who the mother was. This is Cleopatra the 7th, who is the subject of our talk. Arsinoe the 4th, Ptolemy the 13th, and Ptolemy the 14th. Ptolemy the 12th was deposed by the Egyptians, and he fled to Rome. His daughter Berenice took over. The Romans then sent an army to Egypt, brought Ptolemy the 12th back. He executed Berenice the 4th, and he named his daughter Cleopatra the 7th as co-regent, and he died shortly afterward. So, as my reference puts it, the Ptolemies were a thoroughly dysfunctional and homicidal family. They were really quite something. Any questions? Alexandria. The pictures here. This is. I'll get the picture in a minute. When I do these presentations, I try to use contemporary sources. The painting is done 2,000 years later, and it tells us an awful lot more about mid 19th century French painters than it does about Cleopatra. Alexandria was the capital of Ptolemaic Egypt. Egypt was by far and away the richest country in the Roman world. Its grain, the grain from Egypt to North Africa was being shipped to Rome to feed the Romans. I think Rome. A good rule of thumb when you take a look at sword and sorcerer movies, the cities are always sitting in the middle of a desert where there's no food. And in the ancient world, that was generally impossible. Cities were located in the middle of farms. They had to get food, and they had no way of transporting food efficiently as a general rule. There are two major exceptions to that one. In Bolivia during the 16th century, Potosi was mining silver, and so it was actually worth the time and effort to ship food up to them. And the other one was ancient Rome, and by this time they were shipping grain from Egypt and North Africa to Rome. Egypt just had fabulous amounts of money, and whoever controlled Egypt could bribe other Romans, and they could pay troops and raise armies. This made control of Egypt during the late years of the Roman Republic. This made the relationship with Egypt rather complicated. If some Roman got in and took control of Egypt, he was a threat to everybody else. And this is one of the reasons Egypt was able to remain somewhat independent. The map is dating from, as I note in my notes, the map is done in 1990, dates from 1890. But the guy was a German archaeologist, so reasonably good there. The pharaohs. Can you see my arrow? Can you see my mouse? The pharaoh's lighthouse is right about there on that island. This was it was one of the wonders of the ancient world. It was something like 400 feet tall. It was quite impressive. Alexandria was a crazy city. Egypt was obviously Egyptian. Alexandria was largely Greek with a very large Jewish quarter. It turns out the Jews apparently made effective soldiers. They were recruited as military. When Ptolemy the 12th died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra the 7th and Ptolemy the 13th became co-rulers, and they became husband and wife. Cleopatra would have been about 21. Ptolemy would have been about 11 years of age. Being Ptolemies, they fell out and started fighting with each other. By the time Pompey arrived in Alexandria, Cleopatra had been chased out of the city, and Ptolemy was in control of the group of advisors. Ptolemy landed, got off the boat, and they promptly stabbed him to death and chopped his head off. Caesar arrived a couple of days later and handed Ptolemy's head. He either was horrified or affected to be horrified. This was treacherous. It turns out in Dante's Inferno, Ptolemy the 13th is in the depths of hell along with Brutus and Judas, apparently. He would have been 13 at the time all this happened. He wouldn't have had much control over it. Having got ashore, Caesar was not popular. The Alexandrians did not. The Alexandrians didn't like being built by Romans. The Romans were conquering everybody, so they feared they were going to get. They feared they were going to get conquered. They were not happy. Caesar set up in a secure palace, and he set for trying to mediate the feud between the young Ptolemies. This didn't go over with Ptolemy because, of course, he was pharaoh. And you don't get summoned by commoners like relative commoners like Caesar. Cleopatra was outside the city and had no access to it. And had a good chance of being murdered as she entered. So she had to work at it. Contemporary accounts do not describe Cleopatra as beautiful. I was trying to think of what. She was extremely well educated. She was charming. She knew how to put on a show. She spoke 9 languages. She was the only Ptolemy that learned to speak Egyptian, an interesting language to learn to use out there. She was an effective administrator. She knew how to manage an army. She was very good at intrigue. She was good at playing people and factions off against each other. And she was fabulously, I would argue that Caesar screwed everything with tits. She had tits and she was fabulous well. We don't really know if Caesar loved her, but boy, was she convenient to him. She needed to sneak into the city. The painting you see on the film there was done by Jean-Léon Gérôme. He was an academic painter who lived from 1824 to 1904. So of course he was nowhere near contemporary. The guy crouching in the back there looks black, but according to histories, Apollodorus, and he was Sicilian. He stuffed her in a hemp sack. He put her in a boat, paddled the boat to the city, and then he picked her up and carried her to Caesar. My reference says that the Ptolemaic women were all fairly small and thin, so it was wouldn't have been that hard to carry. Having gotten into the palace, she then crawled out of the thing. The outfit you see here is probably more revealing than what she actually would have worn. Jean-Léon Gérôme had a fascination for slave auctions with naked girls and stuff like that. She would have worn a diadem. Now, this is described as a crown. I'm going to call it a crown-like fitting. It sounds like a cloth band of some sort, but a lot of the pictures I see look like actual metal crowns. But it designated a Hellenistic ruler. Cleopatra would have had no sexual experience by this time. Her brother/husband was about 13 at the time. The Ptolemies had a tradition of powerful women. Women, as I've noted above, women ruled the kingdom at various times. Egyptian women had a lot more rights than women in Greece and Rome. They can organize marriages, control properties. They could divorce husbands if they were not happy. Obviously, she met Caesar. And was able to talk to him and impress the hell out of him. Caesar's immediate problems was that he had Ptolemy the 13th in the palace with him, but the army was outside under the command of his advisors, and they were besieging the palace. Caesar was badly outnumbered. The palace was under continuous attack, and they were having a lot of trouble. They were also short of food and water. At some point, Cleopatra's sister Arsinoe escaped outside the city, and she proclaimed point out to everybody she wasn't beholden to the Romans. Then she and her advisors murdered the Egyptian army commander, a guy named Achilles. This didn't help her popularity. Ptolemy III was allowed to leave the palace and take charge of the force. What happens next is all kind of confusing, but basically Caesar received reinforcements. There was a big battle, and Ptolemy, who again was about 13 or 14, disappeared. He was presumably killed and dumped in a swamp or something like that. Caesar lingered in Alexandria. We don't know exactly what he thought about Cleopatra. Did he love her? Did he love Cleopatra, or did he love her money? We don't know which. They hung out in Egypt for quite a long time, for several months. They did a cruise up the Nile to Memphis, and they cruised back down again. And at some point, Cleopatra became pregnant. Caesar's problem was he needed to leave a reliable person in Egypt. Caesar was simply the most reliable person you can get a hold of. Cleopatra, sorry, did I say Caesar? Sorry, Cleopatra was the most reliable person you can get a hold of. She was the oldest. She had administrative skills, and he could leave her in Alexandria. Which is what appealed. Cleopatra's problem, she had no real support in Egypt. She needed Caesar's army to keep her in power. Now that her brother Ptolemy XIII is gone, she married her younger brother, who had about 12 at the time, and he became Ptolemy XIV. He doesn't appear in any of the contemporary coins. It doesn't sound like he had any real power. He just kind of sat there in the corner. Go to Rome. The Romans, question somebody? We're
No
back
questions, no questions. No questions, Howard.
Okay. Oh, there is a question. There's not a question.
No questions, no questions. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. Back in Rome, Caesar was the communications between Rome and Alexander were not good, and Alexander were actually not good. You had to get across with a ship, and if you're out of season, nothing moved. So between December and June, Caesar had no communication with Rome. They had no idea what was going on in Egypt. Finally, he returned to Rome. He brought Cleopatra's sister Arsinoe as a way of keeping her out of mischief. He left a big force of soldiers to keep Alexandria under control, and Cleopatra remained behind and ran the kingdom. Shortly afterwards, she gave birth to Caesarion. My source speculates on who the father was. Caesar had a vigorous sex life. He fathered no other children, so he may not have been something wrong there. Writers as Suetonius questioned the question of the paternity. Caesar, Antony, and Augustus all regarded the child as Caesar's. The baby was really convenient to see Cleopatra in that it set her up with an alliance with Caesar, and he provided successor to her reign. Effectively, Caesarion would become Ptolemy XV. Having set up an effective administration in Egypt, Cleopatra picked up Caesarion and followed Caesar to Rome, settling in one of Caesar's villas. What I'm showing here, I'm on my graphic, or I'm showing, I keep using this, I keep modifying this timeline. Basically, what you're watching is the Roman Republic self-destruct. When the Gracchi were murdered back in the late 2nd century BC, the Roman Republic had a century to go. It was doomed. And you can see the key, when you read the histories, these people seem to be scattered further apart than they really were. They were very contemporary. I guess Augustus was born after the death of Marius and Sulla, but otherwise these guys were very, this thing went down fast. In Rome, Caesar took charge. He reformed the Roman calendar using the Egyptian calendar as a reference. I guess the library at Alexandria impressed him. He started the construction of a public library in Rome. He looked into draining, the waterworks in Egypt were fabulous. He looked into draining swamps around Rome, and he did an official census. This revealed that the Rome's population had been reduced by the Civil War. The normal thing to do in Rome during the Civil War, if you were in control, was kill all your enemies. So there were a lot of dead a lot of Romans were killed. Caesar then celebrated triumphs. He'd won battles. He'd run campaigns in Gaul, Alexandria, Pontus, Africa, and Spain. I guess his triumph in Alexandria, he exhibited Cleopatra's sister Arsinoe. She would have been a teenager at the time. The Romans were actually kind of sympathetic of her. This has probably affected Cleopatra. Watching your kid sister march down a street and change probably is something that sticks in your mind. Even if you do assume she's trying to murder you. Arsinoe was shipped off to Ephesus and the Temple of Diana to get her out of the way. Cleopatra's presence in Rome was controversial. Caesar was married. He had a real wife, Calpurnia, who is well regarded by all the histories. The Greeks and the Egyptians were perceived by the Romans as decadent, immoral, and inferior to the Romans. Cicero, Rome's great orator, detested Cleopatra and spoke out against her repeatedly. He didn't like Caesar much. I think, well, he recognized Caesar for what he was a threat to the Republic. That didn't work. Interestingly, Cleopatra was identifying herself with the goddess Isis. She is regarded, Caesar, at the same time, Caesar claimed descent from the goddess Venus. Venus and Isis are very similar gods. I think they're goddesses of love and stuff like that. And they get connected together quite a bit. This is interesting. Apparently, Caesar built a temple to Venus and actually put a statue of Cleopatra in it. Caesar took charge. He was named dictator for life in 44 BC. He was allowed to wear a triumphal dress at all times. He was allowed to sit on a raised golden ivory chair, which looked like a throne. They made coins of the image. The Romans, don't forget, hated kings. Kings were the people that ruled stupid foreigners. There were a lot of Romans who desperately trying to save the Republic, and these people got together and assassinated Caesar. A bunch of stuff happened at this point. Cleopatra fairly quickly returned to Alexandria. In his will, Caesar named his successor as his 18-year-old nephew Octavian, and he adopted him in his will. He adopted Octavian as his son. Go back. Level. Mark Antony. Mark Antony was related to the Caesars through his mother. His father died. She remarried to a guy named Cornelius Lentulus, who was executed by Cicero for participating in Catilinarian conspiracy. As a young man, Antony was a party animal. In the military, he quickly distinguished himself in battle. He was an effective soldier and a very good leader. He participated. He was in the East. He participated, I guess, in the wars against Mithridates, and he participated in the mission to return Ptolemy XII to Alexandria. The Romans generally didn't like Ptolemy XII. He was called, where's the word? You can't see here. That's not it. Oh, that's not the one. He had a different nickname. Olitz, I think is what he called him. And it meant he was a flute player. Olitz or something like that. It meant he was a flute player. Real men didn't play the flute, as far as the Romans were concerned. The Romans were history's ultimate real men. But he returned to Ptolemy XII. Ptolemy XII, of course, was Cleopatra's father. Cleopatra was quite close to her father. And so he must have met Cleopatra at the time. According to Plutarch, and I was quoting Plutarch here, he also had a very good and noble appearance. His beard was well grown, his forehead large, and his nose aquiline, giving altogether a bold, masculine look that reminded people of the faces of Hercules in painting and sculpture. Antony claimed descent from Hercules. When the civil wars resumed, Antony fought on Caesar's side. When Caesar was murdered, Antony was the guy that took charge of the funeral oration. He managed to incite a riot, which resulted in a whole pile of stuff, people being murdered and a whole pile of stuff being burned. Returning to Egypt, Cleopatra murdered her brother. She was co-ruling with her brother, Ptolemy XVI, but she murdered him and she declared Caesarion to be her co-ruler. Caesarion would have still been a baby, but he was a co-ruler as Ptolemy XV. From Cleopatra's point of view, the good news was that she had a successor. The bad news was she no longer had Caesar prop her up. What happens next is kind of complicated, but Antony wound up in the East. He wound up moving to Alexandria, and he wound up taking up with Cleopatra. Antony and Cleopatra seem to have been the love match. They had kids. They had 3 children. We'll go through them. Alexander, Helio. I've got them listed here. Alexander, Helio, Cleopatra, Selene, Ptolemy Philadelphus. They traveled around. Antony controlled the Roman troops. Antony controlled the Roman soldiers. and this is the deal that kept Cleopatra in power. Rome's situation was complicated. Again, there was a triumvirate between Octavian, Antony, and I believe his name was Lepidus. This broke up a bit, and it rather kind of deteriorated to the point where it was Octavian versus Antony. Octavian stayed in Rome. He started off as a young kid, but he was a lot smarter than people realized. And the relationship between these people deteriorated. Antony was not a terribly responsible guy. The Romans accused him of being sucked up, being seduced by Cleopatra. They accused him of being unmanly and stuff like that. Antony was planning on a war with the Parthians. The idea was to march into Parthia and defeat and avenge the death of Crassus. He organized an army. Apparently, Cleopatra paid for a big chunk of it. He marched into Parthia, and the Parthians just didn't engage him in battle. They conducted a guerrilla war. He marched back, having lost a lot of his soldiers. I think he was also betrayed by the Armenians again. This is a problem that affected Crassus. And the thing was a mess. It damaged his reputation quite a bit. He did go in and invade Armenia. He captured their king and brought him back to Alexandria as punishment. And relationships with Octavian continued to deteriorate. This is a period of some time. As co-ruler, because she was working closely with Antony, Cleopatra was able to recover quite a bit of the old Ptolemaic Empire. She controlled a big chunk of the Middle East. She controlled Cyprus. The empire actually extended, but of course, extended was something fairly close to what Ptolemy II and Ptolemy III had ruled. But obviously, she didn't conquer. She did this by getting along with Mark Antony. I'm going to move to Actium. The relationship broke down. We're looking at a 16th century painting here. There aren't good paintings of ancient galleys. I don't know much about it. One of the problems with understanding ancient warfare is that warfare between the mid 15th century AD and the mid 20th century was dominated by gunboats. And a battle between gunboats, the big gunboat wins. The big gunboat is more guns, bigger guns. It's better protected. Hydrodynamically, big ships are faster than small ships, although large gunboats are usually designed for protection rather than speed. So in a situation like that, if you're an empire of a fleet like this, you board the biggest ship there is, put your flag up, and it becomes your flagship, and that's how you operate. In ancient times, the warships were galleys, and they used rams. And I guess the best analog for that would be a modern fighter plane. And of course, that wasn't understood during the 16th century, or even when you watch, if you watch Ben-Hur in the movies, these ships are big. You want something very small. You want muscle-bound, highly trained, muscle-bound guerrillas at the oars, preferably small guys, but they need to be really powerful. And you need a ship that can accelerate, decelerate, and turn rapidly. And these ships are very lightly built. And so these fleets were huge. As Antony and Octavian confronted each other in Greece, they each had hundreds and hundreds of ships. And another point to make is that in ancient times, so somebody's built 200 ships. So those are not Nimitz-class carriers. The concern was that the Battle of Actium didn't really take place. As they built troops up, there was some question as to whether to fight a sea battle or a land battle. I think it was Octavian had more troops on the ground. It was Antony had more troops on the ground. Bear in mind that Cleopatra was bankrolling all of this. Antony called allies in called in as allies, and various Greek kings came to support him. A whole bunch of other people came to support Octavian. But the various people came over. There was a tendency for people to move across to Octavian. The Romans preferred Octavian to Antony. At some point, the king Herod from Judea suggested to Antony that he murder Cleopatra and just take all her money. Hello? He didn't. As they confronted each other at some point, and Cleopatra decided to make a run for it. There really wasn't a battle of Actium. She had a large galley. She jumped in and took off, rowed as fast as they could, and headed back to Egypt. And Antony took off after her. This was a complete disaster. This meant that Octavian effectively won the battle, which was an absolutely decisive battle. It destroyed Antony's reputation as a real man, as a soldier and a real man. They both fled to Egypt. Was there someone asking a question? They both fled to Egypt. Octavian followed them. There was some fighting. Antony managed a couple of successful cavalry actions, but it was hopeless, and he finally fell upon his own sword and killed himself. Octavian actually occupied Alexandria while Cleopatra was still alive. He was concerned she was going to commit suicide. He almost certainly took poison. I think the comment was, an asp is not a very active snake. If you want to be bitten to death by one, they're just not going to cooperate. And apparently cobras are big. They're about 6 feet long. It's very difficult to conceal one. And the bite is painful and slow. So at some point along the line, she had poison smuggled into her, and she took it and she died. And a couple of her attendants took the poison and they died as well. And there was the famous line where somebody said, I think the Romans asked her if this was well done. And she said, it was well done, as befits the last of a great line of pharaohs. And that was it. I like this painting because I can't see a snake in it anywhere. You could be wrong. I could be wrong, but I can't see one. She really didn't have much chance with Octavian was kind of cold-blooded. It was a difficult guy to manipulate. And that was it for Cleopatra. Caesarion fled Alexandria and tried to get up, I believe, to Arabia or someplace like that. But somebody talked him into coming back. When he got back, he was promptly murdered. Other kids, her other three children by Antony were brought back to Rome. Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus just disappear. So maybe they were murdered, maybe they were quietly murdered, maybe they were taken to an estate somewhere and left and not allowed to marry anybody. They just quietly died. Cleopatra Selene ran into a guy named Juba II of Numidia, and they actually married. Juba became king of Numidia, and he ruled it there, and they actually built the libraries and stuff like that. They built libraries and kind of advanced the city. Their son came back to Rome, and at some point he pissed off Caligula, and Caligula had him killed. Not sure what happened to the family after that. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra is an interesting person to read up. She's one of the people credited with destroying the libraries at Alexandria. She claims she was descended from Cleopatra. I've not seen how she did. This may be a figment of imagination, but I've not seen a connection. The Cleopatra survivors were in the other end of Africa. And that's basically it. Any questions, anybody? Oh yeah, maybe the important.
Howard, there was a question. Can you hear me well?
Yep.
There was a question on the chat, and the question states from Mary, did people get married in those days? I guess that, I don't know what that means. And do you know anything about the marriage ceremonies? Who was marrying them? Were they married in like some society?
Yes, they did. Marrying brothers and sisters was a long tradition of Egyptian pharaohs. The idea was to keep the line pure. They were advertising themselves as god and king. So I guess marrying commoners was degrading or something like that. Basically, Caesar had at least 3 wives. He was married to a woman named Calpurnia at the end there, and he screwed everything he could get his hands on while he was married to her. The woman was expected to be pure and virtuous. The men do whatever they wanted. I noticed when I did this thing, when I did the presentation on King Pyrrhus, that the Macedonians, the men often had several wives. And at his death, Alexander had 3 wives. I think Pyrrhus managed to have 3. The wives did not appreciate this. When Alexander died, Alexander was married to somebody named, I can't remember her name now. I'm thinking Olympia, but I think that was his mother. Alexander's first wife married the 2 murdered the 2 when Alexander died, Alexander's first Macedonian wife murdered the 2 Persian girls that Alexander was married to. King Pyrrhus is married to a nice Greek girl. When he married a couple of Illyrian barbarians, the nice Greek girl took off to the island, I'm thinking Chios. No, I don't look at my notes. Pyrrhus. Can't find it quickly. Well, yes, I can. Where's my map? I've got a map here somewhere. She took off to a nearby important island. I got a better map. I'm looking at my Pyrrhus notes here.
While you're researching,
she took off the island of Corcyra, and she called one of the Ptolemies and offered to marry them, or one of the Antigonuses and offered to marry him. Then he ran over and did so, and so Pyrrhus lost control of the island. So the Macedonians had kind of a loose idea about how marriage, or at least the Macedonian men had a kind of a loose idea how the marriage worked. The Macedonian women were a little stricter, I would think.
So Howard, I'm going to unmute everybody. Wendy has a question. I was wondering if she could ask a question on her own. Let me unmute everybody, and then Wendy have a next question.
Okay.
And then people can raise their hand and ask a question from Howard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I haven't heard anything yet. Yeah, basically the Romans were strict. The Roman men could do whatever they damn well please. The Roman women were expected to have a strong sense of duty. Is Sean muted?
I guess while she's getting unmuted. Go ahead, Wendy. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My question, Howard, you had mentioned that Cleopatra's Selene, one of the daughters of Cleopatra and Antony, were married to a Nubian named Juba II. So I wanted to know if you have any more information about that. Was he accepted into the society or the court, the society? Do you have any information about that particular child?
You can look him up. Sorry, I'll click here. Here is on Wikipedia. He was a Berber prince. Now, how Berber was he? Black? I don't know. What the Romans did, if they didn't occupy the territory outright, they installed client kings. So Juba was a convenient guy to have around. These people showed up in Rome and they entertained people. This is it right here. I didn't knock myself look him up. You can certainly look this guy up. There's the crown.
Oh, this is on Wikipedia. Okay, you're not to look it up.
This is up on Wikipedia. You can look them up. Yep.
Okay, no, I thought maybe you had more more historical background versus what's on the worldwide.
Nope. I didn't work that hard. So I forgot to mention one other thing. Cleopatra's sister Arsinoe, at some point along the line, Antony helpfully murdered her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, she was a nuisance. She was plotting to overthrow Cleopatra.
Yeah. Oh, and I think you answered. Maybe you didn't answer earlier, but someone asked in the chat. Do when you said a lot of these brother, sister, uncle, aunt relationships happen, were the official marriages recognized by the courts? Not the courts, but recognized by society, or we're just like, I'm taking on this woman and she is now a wife role?
The Greeks thought it was weird. The Egyptians didn't. It sounds like these were official marriages. Like they had kids, they married, they screwed, they had kids. the whole bit. I mean, they were descended from each other. It doesn't sound like the Ptolemies had any, like it wasn't like the Habsburg kings of Spain. They don't seem to have been particularly inbred. And bear in mind, we don't know who Cleopatra's mother was.
Oh.
It might have been Cleopatra the Fifth. Where am I here? Where's my
And
card?
do you have any information why they continued with the same names, like Ptolemy, the second, the fourth, the 15, the 16, or
Well, everybody, okay. Caesarion was going to be Ptolemy. I'm not sure about that one. It's that it basically. I'm trying to think here. Let's go back to England. King Edward VII. His name was Bertie. His name was Albert, but somehow he adopted the name Edward when he became king. I'm not sure how that worked. The contemporary King Chuck has not done that. I've not seen an explanation for that. The names Cleopatra, Arsinoe, and Berenice seem to have been popular names for Macedonian princesses.
okay.
And
Okay,
it wasn't
thank
just the
you.
Ptolemies doing it.
Thank
So,
you.
shows a lack of originality. Maybe as a princess, you've earned the right to be called Cleopatra.
I wonder if it was used by commoners as well, or maybe that was just sort of more of a royal.
I'm not seeing Ptolemy. Okay, there is a, I'll get this one right. There is a Ptolemaic model of the solar system. That Ptolemy was not a member of the royal family. And it's too bad I didn't anticipate your question. I could have looked him up. I'm trying to find out what his relationship was. Greek names mean something. So like in the case of Cleopatra, her name, as I noted, means glory of her fatherland. I don't know what Berenice, I'm gonna find this one out. Berenice. Well, tell me what it means. Berenice, short story. Berenice, what does it mean?
When you mentioned that something about the solar system, is it a proposed theory that perhaps if depending on the time of the year, on which lunar calendar you were born, that's what the name came about?
No, the Ptolemy that did the universe was first. I think he was first century A.D. Berenice means bringer of victory. Let's try the other one. Arsinoe. What's Arsinoe go? So if you're Arsinoe means woman with uplifted mind. Now, bear in mind, if you're some working class Greek, you don't name your daughter bringer of victory. It might piss somebody off. Sorry, ask your question. Ask your last question there again. Sorry.
No, someone been in the chat and kind of answered the question. That kind of makes sense.
Oh,
I was
okay.
gonna ask some ancient civilizations may name their children based upon the names are popular depending on the year, the date, or the season they're born under, or which particular moon. So I wasn't sure if that's what the case, but VIX makes sense in saying it might just show your lineage to the popular,
Okay, those names were popular. Alexander the Great had a sister named Cleopatra. Had a sister named Cleopatra. These were popular names. They may have been reserved for members of royalty, possibly.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
There's a possible one there. The Ptolemaic universe, basically he sat there and did observations of the sky, and he tried to work out how the solar system worked. And I believe his was Earth-centric, so he somehow worked out some geometric model as the planets rotated around the Earth. It was quite an impressive piece of work. And it wasn't until Copernicus and Galileo came along that they came up with a better model. But given the facilities available and stuff like that. The library did a lot of scientific research. That was, I'm telling you his name now. Damn it, I can't remember his name now. Somebody was told there was a well in Ethiopia that the sun shone to the bottom. So he visited the place. He then measured them between that place and Alexandria, and he measured the shadow off an obelisk at noon, and then from there he worked out the diameter of the Earth. Eratosthenes, important guy.
Thank you for responding to my questions.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anybody has any questions? Now, have you ever spoken about the fact that Cleopatra had murdered her brother, 14-year-old brother, or well, how old he was? But she was not an heir apparent, right? Her brother, small brother, was. She. Go ahead.
The Ptolemaic women ruled Egypt. They were successful. They were designated as successors. She was older. Certainly, if he'd had the chance, she murdered her brother, and B, she had her sister killed as well. He was basically, these people plotted to seize power. They were homicide. The Ptolemies were homicidal. So she failed to rise above. She was part of the system. She failed to rise above it, I guess.
Also, was Caesar, because he was escaping Pompeii, was this just a fling? Even though Caesarion came to be, from what I read, she walked into the Roman court like she owned it. She was quite inappropriate. She would interrupt him during the meetings, and he kind of was a little bit mesmerized. Like, why are you acting like this? But
we don't know. The comment I'd keep making is that Caesar screwed everything with tits. Cleopatra had tits and fabulous wealth, and the fabulous wealth is something else that Caesar needed. So a relationship with Cleopatra was a good thing from Caesar's point of view, whether or not he particularly liked her. Caesar spent wildly on election campaigns as well as the military. He had an expensive lifestyle. He needed somebody to pay him money. So in that sense, Cleopatra was a valid resource. I would say the love match was Antony and Cleopatra.
They're going on a cruise.
Sorry? Marilyn, I didn't catch that.
no, I don't think she was asking a question.
Oh, okay. I would say the love match is Antony and Cleopatra. Oh, sorry?
No, I don't think she was asking a question. Hold on. Let me just.
Okay. I would say the
Mary,
love match
are you
is Antony
asking a
and
question or
Cleopatra.
are you just talking?
They stuck together maybe long after they should have. Although Cleopatra's situation, was friendly with Caesar because Caesar commanded effective troops, and it was the same thing with Antony. Antony commanded a powerful army, and that allowed her to maintain power. She just did not have the military. She did not have the military force at her disposal. To some extent, it's hard to say whether Cleopatra could abandon Antony safely. I don't think she really had an alternate strategy. I'm kind of puzzled at how the Battle of Actium went. You'd think if we're sitting there and doing a cold-blooded calculation and say we need to win this battle, we can't. If we run away, we're doomed. Antony was told specifically by Herod that he should murder Cleopatra, that she was a liability to him, and he didn't.
Well, there's always this murder. I'm tired of hearing that.
What's that?
Bye.
Sorry? So obviously,
I'm gonna mute for 1 second.
okay. So yeah.
Anyone else has any questions? So one thing, obviously, I want to maybe explain there's a big controversy right now with Cleopatra. Who was she, right? You don't know. You said you don't know her father. Now, how certain are you, or that she's obviously Ptolemy, so to speak, descendant of the Diadochi, which is the generals of Alexander the Great, and that lineage? And then was she Macedonian? Obviously, all the Alexander the Great Diadochis or generals, Ptolemy, then you have the one in Bactria, Seleucid, and then you have the one in Greece, the Cassander. They kind of divided the Macedonian Empire, so to speak, after the conquest of Alexander the Great. But do you think that she had a little bit of Egyptian in her? And then, so there's a big controversy right now. I don't know if you know, with the new Cleopatra, they were depicting the actress that were playing her. She was African American or British African, and then people were saying she was not. She was Greek.
I watched the first part of that thing. I do have a subscription in Netflix. She was Macedonian. I do like Seishi Schiff's comment was that Cleopatra was as Egyptian as Elizabeth Taylor. She was Macedonian. They were having sex with each other. Cleopatra is the seventh, is the first Ptolemy that even bothered to learn to speak Egyptian. I do have a portrait here. I'm looking at the Wikipedia page. Let me just share the screen here. Share screen. Let's share. Where am I?
While Howard is looking, anybody has any other questions? Want to maybe go ahead and ask?
Okay. This portrait is thought to have been done about a century after her death, and it may be based, and maybe they're showing her with red hair. That maybe the artist likes showing people with red hair. Who knows? But I just pulled that off the Wikipedia page. The reason we contemporary pictures show her to be Greek. I think what we do with his historical stuff is we take historical figures and project our own ideas on them. Cleopatra can be regarded as an Egyptian nationalist. She can be regarded as a woman determined to survive in a world of men. You can project all kinds of things onto her. None of her writings exist. None of her writings exist. We really don't know.
So the fact that she's, you said she's a nationalist. Does it mean that when she didn't bring up all the ships that were asked during the, Octavian War, was that because she's a nationalist or she's just disloyal?
We don't know what happened. I'm puzzled. I'm reading through the thing and I'm kind of puzzled to what happened there. Basically, they were leading up to a big battle. Antony was under attack because he was clearly infatuated with Cleopatra, and that was considered to be unmanly. People were defecting to Octavian's side. There was clearly going to be a big battle of some sort. There was some question as to whether the battle should be fought on land or at sea. A lot of Antony's old soldiers told him they wanted to feed on dry land and stuff like that. From Cleopatra's point of view, either you win the battle or you die, and she died. Apparently she had good management skills and stuff like that. It was important. Maybe she thought she didn't abandon Antony at this point. Maybe she should have, but what else does she do? She really, I'm really puzzled. Maybe she panicked. Maybe she succumbed to stress. Herod was definitely advocating murdering her. Maybe a whole bunch of other people were suggesting they murder her too. So it wasn't a safe place.
Right. It's interesting. To me, with the whole Brutus being so disloyal to Caesar, while Caesar loved him like a son, knowingly that he had a relationship with his mother. Caesar had a relationship with Brutus' mother. And if you remember, during the battle with Pompey, Caesar particularly asked, I don't know if it was Mark Antony or one of his generals, to look for Brutus in the field and find him and make sure he's safe, while that guy in the end ended up stabbing him.
Well, Caesar, Caesar was in the habit of sparing enemies. he generated a mind-boggling number of corpses during his wars, but when he won a battle, he was typically merciful. I guess Brutus is put down as one of the great traitors of history, but I would argue that he was out defending Rome's republic, and that was a good thing to do. When I look at the Roman history in general, I think the decline and fall of the Roman Empire is really a stupid subject. There was a barbarian movement across the top of Eurasia, which most of the barbarians entering Rome were fleeing the Huns. During that period of time, Rome's problem was this complete lack of political stability. They weren't a traditional monarchy. They were a failed republic. They were a failed republic. Their political system wasn't stable. When the republic collapsed, their political system wasn't stable. And I think we generally admire the Romans because they were a republic, and we try to model our institutions on their republic. And Caesar does, and this is what Caesar destroyed. So in that sense, I would argue that Brutus was the good guy. Like, remember, Rome's great period was the 2nd century AD, during the period of the 5 good emperors. But I claim that was a biological accident. What happens is that 4 guys in a row didn't have sons to pass power on to. Trajan and Hadrian were homosexuals. They weren't screwing their wives. I don't know what Antonius Pius did. And I think Nerva was also a homosexual. They had to adopt successors. It was a biological accident. They just had 5 really good guys in a row that could maintain control. If the Roman emperor is weak, everything blew up.
So would you say that Caesar destroyed Republic?
Yeah, absolutely.
So he's essentially to blame for Roman, basically in the end dying in the AD.
He's not solely to blame, but he was incredibly ambitious. Sulla remarked on it. Cicero remarked on it. Caesar remarked on it. He was mind-bogglingly ambitious. He was prepared to build a glorious career. A more patriotic guy might have tried to save the Republic. In many ways, his instincts were good. If you systematically massacre your opponents, your surviving opponents respond with similar ruthlessness. So in that sense, this is why I keep producing that little diagram of the Roman Republic going downhill. This is what the Romans did that we admire as a general rule. But Caesar was eager to become sole dictator. He was eager to become powerful. He had to be careful about symbols, because as far as the Romans regarded the title of Rex as something evil and wrong. But who knows, when Octavian gained power as Augustus, he was careful not. The Romans voted him all kinds of titles. Remember, he was absolutely vicious. Unlike a lot of deranged killers of history, he had the intelligence to stop when he finished off his enemies. But the Romans knew he could start again. Octavian made a point of not accepting much in the way of titles. I think he styled himself as first citizen, which is where the word princeps comes from. And he accepted the title Augustus, but in general, he was careful not to. And the other emperors are like that as well. And Tiberius, they think Tiberius may have been a closet Republican. But by the time we hit the 3rd century AD, Rome is an absolute monarchy.
Any other questions anybody has? So what interests me all the time, and this is interesting. What was this relationship with Caesar and Cleopatra? Was it a power play? Did she expect to be married to him? Did she want piece of the empire and be close to the strong man? And as we know, Egypt was a breadbasket um, uh, Roman Empire, and they supplied the grain and bread, Romans, but at the same time, they were dependent on the army, right? The
Yeah.
Romans was much stronger, even when he was escaping to.
But I don't. It's really hard to tell because we don't. Caesar didn't write about Cleopatra. I think other people wrote about that. The relationship suited both of them very well. They got stuff that they needed. Cleopatra's wealth helped Caesar run political campaigns and pay armies. Caesar's army kept Cleopatra in power. She wasn't popular in Alexandria, at least, especially not at first. She kind of ingratiated a bit with them later on, but she was maintained in power by a Roman army. So they benefited.
Interesting. I mean, he did offer her to, and essentially she took him up for it, to overthrow her 14-year-old brother's rule. And at the same time, Pompey offered Cleopatra to cut Caesar's head off when he was escaping to Alexandria. So she chose the right side out of the side.
Well, no, she had no control over that. When Pompey got off the boat, he was actually killed. Ptolemy the 13th was 13 or 14 at the time. His advisors were really in charge, and they're the ones that actually killed Pompey. Pompey's assumption is he got along with both Ptolemy the 13th and Cleopatra the 7th. So his assumption is he could land in Egypt and make connections with people, but they killed him instead. So it's hard to say how that worked. So in that sense, she had no choice. By the time Cleopatra got into Alexandria, Pompey was dead and Caesar was there. And she could argue that she had nothing to do with the death of Pompey. And I'm sure she was. I
have a question here, Howard. How did Cleopatra die, and where is she buried?
She probably took poison. The various snakes she could have killed her with are either not very deadly or. I remember about 20 years ago, there's all kinds of programs on TV by Australians pestering deadly animals. And I think when they talk about snakes, they use the words deadly and lethal don't mean the same thing. The deadliest snake in the world is an inland taipan, also called a fierce snake, and apparently they're mild-mannered. If you don't really, really pester them, they don't bite you. But of course, they do bite you, you're dead meat. Apparently, the asp is described as a lethargic snake. It's really, making it bite you and kill you is very difficult. And cobras are about 6 feet long. They're big snakes. You can't smuggle them. You're not going to smuggle them in a bowl of figs. And the death is painful. It's drawn out and painful. They figure the Ptolemies were all experts on poison. They would have taken something that wasn't very painful. As far as where she's buried, we don't know where her tomb was. I think she was buried. I think Octavian buried her respectfully.
Mm-hmm. But would she be buried as Egyptian or Greek? Because she was both.
I'm not sure how they would have done that. If the Romans are in charge and the Macedonians in charge, she probably would have been buried. I've not seen an explanation. When they uncover Egyptian tombs, they're always Egyptian as opposed to Ptolemaic. And of course, during the Egyptian period, don't forget, we're talking 3,000 years here. Burial practices kept changing.
Right, because the pyramids were built during the early Old Kingdom.
Pyramids are 2600 BC.
Yeah, that's an Old Kingdom, and that was mostly Khufu, and stuff like that. So those are old pharaohs. They're not even new pharaohs weren't building much of pyramids at all. They were just buried in the King Valley, right?
Right. Yeah, they kept changing. So I'm not sure how they did that. But the Greeks built up. The word mausoleum is Greek. I think King Mausoleus was king of Halicarnassus, and he died, and his wife built him this massive tomb, which was one of the wonders of the ancient world. So with the Greeks, that when they built a tomb, it was a building with the body inside. And at that point, it's just a question of how politically correct you were. Probably if you made a big point of marching into Cleopatra's tomb and worshiping her as a god, the Romans would start wondering who you were. Remember, Octavian's prescriptions were horrific. He killed thousands of people in Rome. He exterminated his enemies. So he had the, unlike a lot of homicidal dictators, he had the sense to stop when he won. And he lasted 40, he was in power for 40 years. So the Romans could sit back and say, okay, things are peaceful and safe. And if we don't piss this guy off, they'll stay peaceful and safe. This is a town a lot of homicidal dictators don't have.
But now, what was a reflection of her being nationalistic? I mean, how was she reflecting as being nationalistic? Because she claimed herself a pharaoh.
She made a point of participating in Egyptian ceremonies and Egyptian religions. When she went, don't forget, she actually spoke the language, unlike the other Ptolemies. So it sounds like she did everything she could to ingratiate herself with the Egyptians. I'm not sure how you really can't be a pharaoh. A pharaoh is a godlike creature that's sort of separate from the regular population. It's really hard to be, I would think it'd be really hard to be a pharaoh of the people. She seemed to ingratiate, on one hand, she seemed to ingratiate herself. On the other hand, she was being held in power by Roman troops at no time, which, the book I'm reading here says she rebuilt the Ptolemaic Empire, but she wasn't really in control. The Romans were rebuilding it for her. She did it by sucking up to a Roman general, and everything was great as long as nobody defeated the Roman general. And of course, that's not how it turned out. So it's not like she did it. She didn't raise an army and lead the army in battle and actually reconquer all this territory. It's hard to tell. All the literature is Greek, not Egyptian. So I don't think we know what a regular Egyptians thought of her. There was a very specific Alexandrian culture that I'm not sure it functioned outside the immediate vicinity of Alexandria. I'm looking at my map of Alexandria here, and I see a Greek quarter and an Egyptian quarter. I don't see, and with my drawing here, wrong direction, click. I see a Greek quarter and I see a Jewish quarter. I don't see an Egyptian quarter.
Talking about Jewish quarter, I know that 30% of the city was Jewish.
Yes.
So how was the relationship between Jews and Greeks during Cleopatra? Very bad, right?
Well, interestingly, the Jews were effective soldiers. Apparently, the Ptolemies raised Jewish troops. They were effective. So I don't know the details of that. It's just interesting.
There was a famous Jewish Alexandrian philosopher, Philo, who went to Caligula to ask for help against Greeks in Alexandria. I mean, we're talking about much later, right? About at least 150 years later. And Caligula didn't even know the Jews exist.
Okay.
And he didn't know.
Not a historian, but think about another interesting point to remember here, and this is brought up with Cleopatra all the time. The Ptolemies were homicidal as all hell. You were a lot safer. If you were a Ptolemy and you were with the Romans, you were a lot less likely to be murdered than you were if you hung out with Ptolemies. So raising a troop among your Jews, you've got troops that are probably loyal to you and who will refrain from murdering you. This is probably an attraction of mercenaries. As an evil dictator, your army's patriotic duty is to kill you and throw you out of power. You really want mercenaries. Or your army has some claim to the throne, or your local native commander has some claim to the throne, which means killing you and throwing you out is a really good idea. How to become king.
Yeah, Wendy has a question. Wendy, go ahead. I'll mute you. Go ahead.
Oh, hi guys. My question was there any Nubian sections or any more sub-Saharan sections of Alexandria at the time during Cleopatra's the seventh rule?
Okay, Cleopatra's
Or is
daughter
anything
wound up.
known?
Okay, Cleopatra's daughter wound. The Nubians were way west. We're at the other end of Africa. We're at the other end of North Africa, basically. There must have been Nubians in Alexandria. Was the center of commerce in the Mediterranean, so there must have been Nubians there, but not in large numbers.
Well, one thing I want to say to Wendy,
Yeah.
a large cavalry of Hannibal, who was prior to Caesar, those during the Republic time, was actually Nubian cavalry. They were very famous, cavalry. And then there's a famously when Hannibal was attacking Rome, and he just defeated and killed about 40,000 Romans. And his general, his name Massinissa, told famously to Hannibal, you know how to win the battles, but you don't know how to conquer the Rome. And then that's when Hannibal made an executive decision not to attack the Rome, because he said he didn't have enough siege battle machines. And then he also but Nubian cavalry was amazing, and they defeated Romans head on. And even though Hannibal was an amazing strategist, and Carthage was not known to creating generals because they were a merchant nation. So by the way, tomorrow we have a presentation on Phoenicians, who were the predecessors of Carthage and their relatives. So to join us, but at the same time, Roman didn't want to piss off the Nubians, and in fact, when they raised Carthage, they had to persuade the Nubian kings, and at that time it was Massiniss's son, to help him conquer Carthage. So they couldn't really do it without Nubian help. I don't know if that shows you that Nubian were amazing mercenaries and very loyal and great on horses.
Mm-hmm. And the whole point, Juba II, I think what they call a client king. So he was king of Nubia. The Romans weren't in Nubia ruling, but they expect him to be nice to the Romans and look after Roman interests.
Ah, okay. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? If not, go ahead.
I do have another question. Do we know if there any texts survived the Library of Alexandria talking about the battles that the Nubians did? Is there any surviving text or material that can be referenced?
The Library of Alexandria, as we know, famously got destroyed. We actually have a presentation on the Library of Alexandria that got destroyed, and there was a lot of really great texts that got destroyed with it. Maybe there was some, but obviously, there was a lot of battles that they did on Roman soil in Sicily. The Nubians were involved, and there's a lot of great explanation of Hannibal, because what Hannibal did, he, with the Nubian cavalry, he roamed around Sicily for a while and tried to convert all the Italic cities. Italics is a predecessor of Italians, to convert to Carthage, by offering them, homage and not destroying, famously not destroying any of their crops. Go ahead. Sorry.
Look up King Juba of Numidia, Juba II. That's up on Wikipedia. They built he and his wife built a library. He was it says here he was a respected scholar and author. So there was a library. There was a library in Numidia. It doesn't say what happened to it.
Well, it was the whole culture.
I'm looking at the page here. It doesn't say what happened to it in the end, but of course, you build a city. The reason we know a lot about the Mesopotamians is when some damn foreigners showed up and killed everybody and burned the place to the ground. It baked all the clay tablets.
Thank you so much.
The interesting thing, Wendy, also Nubian had an amazing culture, and we did a presentation on that as well. I don't know if you know, Nubians build all the pyramids too.
And
That I know,
yeah,
but I
so
wasn't
the
sure
pyramid.
how the links to Cleopatra. I was just trying to see if there was any more from this presentation, if we know about their roles, the continuous uprising of different reigns to power. I just wanted to know if there was any
Well, there was a
more.
whole dynasty. They call them African dynasty of pharaohs. The 25th dynasty was West African dynasty, and famously, King Taharka is actually mentioned in the Bible as a pharaoh dynasty. That's actually Western African pharaoh dynasty, and
You said the 25th dynasty, is that old?
it's
The
during
25th
the
dynasty?
during the New Kingdom. Yes, so King
Okay.
Taharka is mentioned in the Bible, in Old Testament, as pious Ethiopian kings of as pharaohs, and there's the famous he saved Israel or Canaan from destruction, famously. I mean, there's this God involvement. Obviously, it was mice that ate, the Philistines' bows and stuff like that. Is because and then King Taharka saved Canaan from destruction, stuff like that. So it was an interesting aspect of it. And he was the first philosopher actually of Egypt as well. There's something called a philosophical stone. Check it out. That is in British Museum by West African pharaohs. It was an interesting story about him as well.
Well,
So just
definitely read up on Juba II. He was an intellectual and he was quite productive. Another thing to think, you were asking about revolts and stuff like that. There was a very important transition in Rome. During the late Republic, if you were a Roman politician, you wanted a force of loyal, battle-hardened troops with you, which it made it a lot easier to win elections and stuff like that. Once Augustus established the empire, if you were commanding Roman soldiers out in the field and you defeated somebody and won a glorious battle, your troops had a tendency to declare you imperator. And this would start a civil war, and you'd have to go and kill the emperor. The emperor would have to kill you. Particularly the early Caesars were not into military aggression. It was dangerous to have. If you wanted to invade somebody, you took command of the troops yourself, like Trajan did. If there was a general in the field, you really were better off if he didn't attack anybody, because you'd have a civil war in your hands. The Roman emperors did not have a mandate to be emperor. The traditional Indo-European Aryan monarchy, the kings trace their ancestry back. The Greeks were into Heracles. King Pyrrhus traced it back to Achilles. The Germans like to trace their ancestry to Woden. You can go back and say, I'm descended from the god Woden, that's why I'm king and you're not. And this might keep you from being murdered. The Romans weren't protected like that. This affected their relationship with the natives. So they were better. I don't think they didn't rule Numidia. They got along with Numidia, and they probably made a point of being nice to them. If you're Augustus Caesar, you really don't want somebody out there. If somebody has to go out there and conquer the place, they're going to be a threat to your hold on power.
Well, Rome, the Numidians rebelled against Rome several times. And if we have first century AD, there was this one-eyed queen, Numidian queen, I forget her name. Famously, one of the pyramids that got destroyed by this Italian mercenary who stole the treasure. That was her burial. They used to bury their gold and all the lodgings with the kings on the tip of the pyramid. So it's interesting when this Italian mercenary, who was actually a part of British Corps, he was a doctor. He actually defected in order to search. And so what they did is they destroyed all the tips of the Numidian pyramids. And one of the pyramids that they destroyed had this one-eyed queen who rebelled against Rome, and they found, I think it's in the Munich Bavarian Museum, is at least $50 million worth of her diamond and gold jewelry. I forget her name, but it was an interesting find. He wasn't able to, by the way, when he stole all this stuff, he wasn't able to smuggle it, and he got actually somebody attacked him on the way to Germany, and he was able to only sell earrings. But those earrings are like $2-3 million at least.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? I have somebody just joined again. So it's such an interesting aspect with Caesarion. I know, Howard, did you ever hear about the Roxana that married Alexander the Great and then and had a son with him? He was the only son he had. Alexander the Great.
Roxanne, I'm trying to remember which one's which. Hold on, I've got notes on this.
She was a Bactrian queen. So it reminds me the same situation after Alexander the Great died. They tried to, this guy Cassander, who ran Macedonia, and one of his generals tried to actually protect them for a while, but they said that Ptolemy in the end destroyed and killed. His name is Cassander, apparently. Macedonian the Great son was named Cassander. And so they killed Roxana, his wife, in Bactria. It was famously when Alexander the Great said you have to marry a local tribesman's daughters in Bactria, and he married one as well. So he made Ptolemy, he made Seleucid, all of them marry all the local wives.
I'm looking at my Pluto, my King Pyrrhus note, because there was quite a bit going on here. Here we go. Alexander on his deathbed was asked who would inherit his empire, and he said it would go to the strongest. Perdiccas was the general. Supported yet to met and agreed our highness would rule as King Philip III, and Roxana's child would co-rule if it was a boy. Perdiccas murdered Meleager. Murder. Basically, every murder half sister had a half-sister son, Inane, who commanded troops on the battlefield. In battle against Iran, who was also commanded by the queen. She was able to kill this queen in battle, in hand-to-hand combat. Where am I here? Okay, Antipater, governor of Macedon, was in control over Aridaeus, Roxana, and Alexander IV. Who killed them? They were all killed. I think Roxana was the one that murdered the two Persian. I think Alexander had 3 wives at his death. I think Roxana was the one that murdered the 2 Persian princesses.
Yeah, she was a Macedonian. She was Bactrian. She was from the. Right now, if you go to Afghanistan, you find a lot of Greek cities. Apparently, there was over 100 cities throughout the world called Alexandria. And one of the cities they found was in Afghanistan. It was a Greek city, completely Greek, and they just found a lot of remains. They had amphitheater and all the Greek columns and stuff like that. So the Greeks were great about spreading around, much better than Romans, their culture, because Romans actually emulated in a lot of the cases Greeks, right? I mean, if you think of it, like Cleopatra didn't become Roman, she was Greek, and in all intents and purposes here.
Of course, the Greeks didn't. The Romans never got anywhere near Afghanistan, so it was Greek. Now, I'm looking at my notes here. Olympia seems to have been Alexander Great's mother, Olympia, seems to have been Epirus. Seems to have been from Epirus, or she's part of their royal family tree.
Yeah. Well, again, Howard, thank you for this presentation. It was really good. So tomorrow, please join us for Weird Phoenicians. We're going to talk about the sacrifices of Phoenicians. We're going to talk about where they came from. And we have a lot of really good presentations. If you guys want to learn about Saddam Hussein next week on Wednesday, Richard is going to talk about Saddam Hussein. Then we have a history of opera. If anybody wants to learn about where the opera came from, we have an amazing presentation on Olmec heads. It's South American, this mysterious heads that might have been created by aliens, who knows? But Jane is going to do the presentation on that. We have a lot of philosophy, Asian philosophy, particularly Indian philosophy, Chinese philosophy, Confucius presentation. If you guys want to also check out our presentations on the, we have presentations on even things like AI, artificial intelligence, or crypto, and stuff like that. So and a lot of the philosophical reasonings and political questionings. But mostly this is about history, and Howard is our ancient expert on ancient history. So hopefully, Howard, soon, maybe a couple of months or a month, you do another one like that on something interesting as well. You can find any topic on ancient history that interest. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll warn you, I'm actually reading up on Joan of Arc at the moment.
Oh, I would love for you to do a 100-year war.
That was,
that
one's actually, I've got Lord Woodhouse's, I've got an 1835 copy of Lord Woodhouse's Universal History, and it's got a very different story of Joan of Arc, and it sounds credible to me.
Well,
So I'm not sure when that'll be ready. I'm working on it slowly.
But what, just a little bit of synopsis, or maybe a preview, different history of her being, so she was very self-centered. Well, just what friend about her. I mean, like, to me, we were very scared. It was extremely, and she thought the other. She was
Your
not.
sound is really breaking up. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right, we'll end it here. I want to thank you, Howard, so much, and thank you for a great presentation. I hope everybody has the rest of the weekend.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good rest of